So let's have a look at this floor material. It's a pretty simple thing in the end. Although it looks very detailed, this is a single mesh that was obviously created in 3D, in 3ds Max. And the challenge here was to try and replicate the high poly detail that we have in 3D Studio. This was created in RailClone here, so we've got very high poly. I mean, it's not that much high poly because here we were representing only a single room in Unreal, but the idea here was to try and replicate the very detailed floorboards, you know, with these little chamfered edges everywhere, and so something that would end up being very high poly in the scene, you know, if we were on a larger scene, and how to export all these without having to export, obviously, all the geometry. So this was achieved using this render to texture functionality with a floor to texture, and then here I'll let you figure this out. I'm not going to go into 3ds Max now, but there's if you're using a different software, there might be probably the if it's Blender or Maya, definitely the way to export the diffuse, normal, and some sort of specular map or roughness if you're using that workflow, because we need to transfer that over to the PBR workflow in Unreal. So the way this was done is using this. I output a texture that was fitting the entire floor. So that's what we've got in here. The way this material was created was pretty simple once you've got the right texture. So actually, let's have a look at the textures we've got. I'll show you those from inside the material. So we've got a simple diffuse or base color. I always call it diffuse because I'm too old school. So this is a really, high res 4K texture here, and it's pretty, it's got all the details. So one thing that we've got in the texture in 3ds Max, actually I'll go back in 3ds Max, show you that, was the wait for it to load up. It always takes a little bit of time to find the texture. So what we've got here obviously is also the material by element, which it gives us the material ID for the random material ID for each floorboard. And I used the free multi-texture plugin from CG Source to allocate the floorboard textures randomly around, so to give us a bit of variation. So that's very, very current. So I used the render to texture to output these textures, and then put these ones to apply them to the geometry. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So this is our diffuse, and you can see that there's variation. I didn't use masses of different ones, so there's a little bit of repetition here. So ideally I would have done a bit more randomness, so maybe use more floorboards, but that's good enough, really. Here, because we're using the texture for the base color, we've got this in sRGB mode, and like I said, 4K. So that's really simply just plugged into the base color, and I've just used a parameter here. I've put it on 0.5, and then that's the value I use. So it's pretty standard, pretty simple. Metallic obviously to 0, and the specular here I put it as a parameter to be able to play with. So I didn't put any texture in the specular map. Specular, I put it to really low in this instance. The roughness, I created a specular channel in here, although that's not here, but I needed a way to output something that I could use in roughness. So that's what this image was. So let's have a look at that. And so you see that's just basically a black and white version of our image, and it's really pretty subtle, you know, really low. And so because we want to use that as a piece of information where our roughness, you know, what's black is going to be completely smooth and what's light is going to be rough, we have to have the sRGB unticked in this instance. And I plugged in also a parameter to give me the control over the you know, the amount of roughness I've got. And then again, really simple. Here we've got our normal, and then so you see that the normal here was not a photoshopped version of the diffuse map. It's an image that is going to give us these grooves between the floorboards, and that's really important, because if we use the Photoshop to create the normal from the diffuse map, we would have had these lines, but we would have had also a lot of bump inside of the floorboards, and that would have been too much to control. So it's important to start working this way and to separate the normal in. So you see, it's a really, really, really simple material. Couldn't be simpler, really. But here, I think the result speaks for itself. It's very very effective. So the one thing that I did wrong here is that I saved it as JPEGs, and you can see that it was a bad idea, because when you get really close, we get a lot of compression artifacts. So use PNGs as much as possible, especially in the normal. I would say that's a mistake I am going to not repeat, hopefully. It's so tempting to use JPEGs because we're used to it, but here in this instance, it was a bad idea. Anyway, when we're far, it doesn't you know, make that much difference. So here, the other thing I guess to mention is the use of the reflection probes, and in combination with the screen space reflections for the accuracy here. Okay, and that's pretty much it. So hopefully that's useful.